John chapter 1, verses 10 through 13. You would find that on page 1049 in your pew Bibles. He was in the world, and through the world was made through him. The world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. This is the word of the Lord.
Please be seated. We continue our sermon series through the Gospel of John, and we're still in the first chapter. Next week we'll be in the second chapter, so we'll be motoring right along. And last week we learned that God has made all things beautiful. And all things are orderly, they are utilitarian. That is, everything in the world that God has created has a purpose. And that is to glorify their Creator. And in this week's passage, things turn ugly, if you will, because John writes that he came into the world, but the world did not recognize him, and the world did not receive him. He was rejected. So those that are created by God were rejected their Creator. It's really rather tragic when you think about it. But thanks be to God, he has not left us in our rejection of him. That's a good thing. All we have to do is say yes. Is yes a hard word? We say yes, we say no all the time. Sometimes we say maybe. Maybe. Kind of an unsure thing. Have you said yes to receiving Christ as the only way you can be restored from your fallenness? Who here has said yes? I'm going to put you all on the spot. Some have said yes. Some people have said maybe in the world. Other people have said outright no, nah. Now, realizing that when you say yes to Christ, you are saying no to other things. That's a fact. You are saying no to worldly ways. And we learn what worldly things are and worldly ways. We are saying no to those things that tempt us. The world wants to lure us back into its ways. I don't think it likes that we have left the fold, if you will. And what John is saying here in this passage is that some people on this earth have received who Christ is, and others have rejected him. And he's painting a really clear picture. You've either received him or you have rejected him. There's no fence sitting. And for those of us who have received Christ, I think it might be helpful to us as we as a church look to have our church grow and to reach people in our community for Christ. Not that we aren't already, but to perhaps do that on even a more, on a larger scale, a more intentional scale. I think it might be helpful to us to understand why unbelievers do not want to receive Christ. And there are reasons, and when we better understand these reasons, we better understand those people we are trying to reach with the beautiful message of Christ. And Tozer, A.W. Tozer, talks about why Christ's own received him not. The first is that they have been blinded. The world has been blinded. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, Paul writes that the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So that is the first thing for us to realize in trying to reach the unsaved, is that they are blind. What does Amazing Grace say? I once was blind, right? But now I see. And every time I sing that, it gives me chills. Because it's like, that is real, that is true. However, if you are still blind and you read those words, you go, it means nothing. You do not resonate with that. I can speak for my own life that I see Christ more clearly every day. As believers who have had the scales removed from our eyes, we all have our own testimony about how we see Christ more clearly in our life. You may not notice it on a day-by-day basis. It's kind of a short little window. But maybe on a week-by-week or year-by-year, it's easier to see. Look back and be like, yeah, I see who Christ is more than I did 5 years ago. And I think it is a magnificent thing in this life to have our faith grow and to feel like our faith is growing, some sense of it, and our vision of who Christ is expand. So the first thing is that unbelievers have been blinded. They are blind. Second, saying yes to Christ means a change in priorities in life. To receive Jesus when he was here in the world would have meant possible financial loss. And we have an example in the rich young ruler. For him to follow Jesus would mean losing every bit of his property, because what did Jesus say? He said, this guy comes to him and says, what must I do to inherit the kingdom? Oh, give away everything you have and come follow me. Wasn't real thrilled about that. He walked away. He walked away in and of his own choice. Why? He had a lot of stuff. The stuff was more important than Jesus. And at that very moment, he went, stuff's here and Jesus is here and Jesus is interesting to me. He wouldn't have approached Jesus if he didn't have an interest in him and thought that he could answer his question. So there was something there. He didn't want to give up his priorities. And that's his choice. And the people of Jesus' day would not receive him because they love money more than they love their God. And why do people not receive him today? Well, the answer is simple, and yet it is complicated, if you will. In order to receive Jesus Christ as he demands to be received, requires turning your back on everything, which might mean personal financial loss. There is that scripture that I learned at an early age, and it is Luke chapter 16, verse 13, and no servant can serve two masters, because he will love the one and hate the other. You cannot serve both God and money. It's a simple message, but it's tough to do. And the third reason that people do not want to receive Jesus is it has to do with our habits. For the Jews, to receive Jesus would have meant a change in their way of living, and they refused to allow the pattern of their life to be disturbed. They were all about pattern. Rituals, and their habits were firmly established, and nobody was going to change them. And that carries through to today. To receive Jesus Christ will mean a change in our way of living, a change in habits. And some people are not going to change their way of living no matter what. They just aren't. They're entrenched in their habits. And their habits are more important than anything that they sense that Jesus has to offer. Now let me share with you a personal example of a change in habit that came about in me because of saying yes to Christ. When I was younger, I was not particularly organized. Really rather careless with things. And as I grew in my faith, started to become more mature and see that Jesus really was more important than anything else, I began to see that God wanted me to get my life together. And for me, getting my life together, at least in part, meant developing the habit of organization. It was hard at first. Put this thing here and that thing there, whereas before I was like, I would just drop things wherever and then figure I would find it later. No real system, no forethought as to keeping track of things. And it took quite a while, really years, to change my habits, because our habits become ingrained in us. We do things without even thinking about them. That's really the part of a definition of a habit, is that it just becomes something that's a part of you until somebody says, "Hey, why do you do this? Why do you tap your hands on the table?" "Oh, I don't do that." "Yeah, you do. You're doing it right now." "Oh," And that's just one example. People do things all the time, and we don't even realize it. And it took a long time to develop my whole way of keeping track of things. Personal items, appointments, and so forth. I remember that I used to leave things, especially in like public places, restaurants. I would go into a restaurant with my coat, sunglasses, say keys or something, and I might leave some of those things either on the restaurant table or on the chair or the bench. And half the time that I left the restaurant, I would leave something behind. And I'd get in my car and I'd drive away. And I'd get home to be like, oh man, I left my wallet at the restaurant again. And God was working on me. He said, you need to become more orderly. Why? Because I'm a God of order. And as God came more and more into me, I take on more and more the characteristics of Jesus, of God, orderliness. You know, so then what I learned to do is I would always look at my chair as I got up. And it's a simple thing. You get up to leave a restaurant, you don't just dun-dun-dun, walk out the door. That's what I was doing. Now I get up, I look at the table, I look around, I look at the chair I was just sitting on. I'll look at the other chairs I even wasn't sitting on. So that I am convinced when I walk away from that table, I haven't left anything there. And it took me quite a while to develop that habit. And it took discipline. The fourth reason for refusing Christ has to do with personal cleansing. Accepting Christ means a thorough inward house cleaning of our heart. Jesus taught that the pure in heart would see God. Before Christ will come, there must be a thorough, if not radical, house cleaning. Those who say no to Christ love their sin more than they love God. Their insides are just thoroughly mucked up. Saying no to Christ means saying yes to sin. There is no other way. Now, I used to love my sin more than I love God. I did. I didn't think of it that way. Ooh, I love my sin, I love my sin, I love my sin. Who says that? Some people do, actually. I never actually said that. And so I have a story of personal cleansing. Saying yes to Christ meant that I must change the music that I listened to. When I was younger, a teenager, and in my 20s and so forth, I listened almost exclusively to secular music. AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Def Leppard. Good music, great tunes, really. However, I will admit, and many of you probably will as well, that what they're often singing about is it's worldly. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, pursuing just pleasure in life, I don't know, and this and that. And I was not a strong Christian at the time I was listening to these things. I had said that I'd accepted Jesus, but it hadn't really developed in me. It's a process. And so even though I was a Christian, I said I was a Christian, I didn't think that listening to this stuff was bad for me. I didn't. I thought I could take it. I thought I could handle it. I can have all of that stuff, that worldly way of thinking and living go into my ears and into my brain, and it wouldn't affect me in a worldly way. I could allow all that stuff to go in there and still be all right with God. Now, when I was in my mid-20s, I experienced a personal spiritual revival. Personal revival. Now, I was attending a church, and the whole church wasn't having a revival. I was having a revival.